You deer hunt?
A lot.
I'm kidding. I know you deer hunt. Have you shot any yet?
No. I just finally started getting to be able to go.
Yeah.
I didn't get much woods time early.
But he sat in them woods.
Oh.
I sat.
Looking for a buck.
I saw them deers.
Up in my little tree house.
Yeah, looking for a buck in
My
the
kid
tower.
straight calls them tree houses too. It's great. He's like, Dad, can we go hang out in the tree house and
It's
eat
an
snacks?
adult treehouse. That's essentially all it is.
More or less. More or less.
100%. It's kind of like a.
With worse mosquitoes.
Oh, if you don't have a thermostat, just go home.
Yeah.
I haven't done that much deer hunting in the Lowcountry yet, but I would assume the mosquitoes are really bad.
See, y'all have real deer, and since y'all have seasons, the deer still act like deer. So there's good deer here. Just get ready to be a little disappointed.
You know,
Don't be disappointed with the mosquitoes because they live up to standard.
Just like we have trophy mullet, we have trophy mosquitoes.
the way I always know it's deer season, I was up in Maryland this weekend. This is actually kind of sad, but like, you drive up I-95.
It's rut time, baby.
It is bad. Like, there is so much roadkill right
Carnage.
now.
Yeah.
It's disgusting. And I was like scared because I was driving at night, and you don't see that many, like, I don't know. I see so many dead, and I'm like, I'm not seeing that many now alive, and that worries me because I'm like, where are they?
Those other drivers didn't either to the last moment.
I know, and I was in the right lane at one point, and then like way down, I see like just 20 pairs of eyes. I was like, oh shit! I got in the
They're
left
like in
lane.
a trance too. They'll just like walk right out.
I
On
know.
the good news, you weren't asleep at the wheel after that. You had the adrenaline pumping.
Yeah, I guess. I've had one really narrow miss in New York.
With my truck, I'm
Y'all have
looking
real
for 'em.
deer up in New York. Like, they're not like our dogs with antlers down here. Those are like real large
Dude,
animals.
I saw a hammer driving down 17 early season, like really big, really big.
Now,
deer.
whereabouts was this guy?
On 17, you know, between here and Savannah.
Somewhere a good spotlight and 12 gauge could get him between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The every time I go on rivers, like early in the morning on the way to the ramp, I'm like looking for him. It's like, please walk out in front of me. Please walk out in front of me. Just like looking for a reason to get a new truck. Just don't hit the boat.
I used to pick the weakest looking oak trees on every storm to park under.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yep.
Geico, don't listen to this.
Yeah.
Well, we're here with Captain Connor Bryant, Captain Cleve Hancock. For people watching, you might recognize this beautiful face from Skiff Talk, this beautiful face from Cast+Drafts,
Yeah.
And Skiff Talk.
And one of the
Skiff
early
Talk.
episodes, yeah.
Yeah.
The 7-Eleven, Ashley River Road.
I show up in all kinds of weird places.
Yeah.
It's
He never
you just come to know it.
Yeah. Well, you guys had a really good idea about just like sitting down and having a conversation about just kind of like the basics of Redfish 101. And we might follow this up down the road with some specific like instructional videos or something like that to show like specific things. But I figured like we could just talk a little bit about some of the things that you're doing with your clients to like prep them. Hopefully we can cover stuff that's also like good for people who have never done it before, brand new people to red fishing, to saltwater fishing. And then, hopefully people that have more experience can also just come away with some cool tips or tricks and whatnot.
Of course.
Yeah, I guess, do you guys want to talk a little bit about maybe Cleve, like how did you first get into red fishing? Like, what was your kind of introduction to that? And then ultimately, how did it turn into like guiding?
Yeah, exactly. So I grew up down in the Tampa Bay area of Florida. Started fishing since I could pretty much hold a rod. And, you cast at mangrove shorelines and edges long enough, you're going to find a redfish. And believe it or not, I caught a number of snook, ladyfish, trout, all kinds of fish. Redfish was one of the later game fish that I caught, which is kind of weird to think of growing up in Florida. But kind of fell in love with them, chasing them down there. And then, of course, coming to Charleston, they are our game fish. You know, they're synonymous with our waters here, so it kind of makes sense to really dial in on them. You know, what I love about a redfish is they're just enough of a pain in the butt. They do what they should do most of the time, but they put you on your toes enough where you're never quite know for sure what you're getting.
They're like a mean girl.
Yeah.
They're mean until like they're not.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. There's always that 1 out of 10 times they do something kind of a little bit weird. And that's, I think at the end of the day, that's what makes you fall in love with them. They're a great sight fishing fish. They'll get shallow, they'll back, they'll tail, they'll blow up on shrimp and bait. And they do all kinds of just great things that make them such a wonderful sight fishing target. And then they do just enough of things that make you scratch your head at the end of the day, that make you want to go back to the drawing board, reassess. You know, nothing stays really set in stone with them. And I think that's kind of my draw to them, at least.
Yeah.
Yourself, Connor?
Very similar. Yeah. It's, you know, they're, especially in the Charleston area, you can't get away from them. They're everywhere. They're not hard to find. Getting them to eat, especially for somebody new, I can definitely understand the challenge of it. But it's one of those things where I say you got to find the recipe of the day. You got to find just what it is that day that they want. There's certain little tips and tricks that work 99% of the time, and about the time you think that they work every time, you know, you have a change in barometric pressure, or, you know, you missed out on coffee that morning and the fish know it, and then they change their regular behavior. And that's what I like about them, is about the time you think you have them figured out and you start to kind of want to focus on something else, you'll have a change, and then you kind of like start over from scratch with them.
Yeah. You grew up in Myrtle Beach.
Yep.
Were you red fishing early on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started red fishing. I mean, they're in the marsh in Myrtle as well, so it's similar to Charleston fishery wise, not nearly the amount of marsh. Yeah. But yeah, our red fishery in like Horry County is pretty good. So that was always something that we could count on. And
yeah.
They were, even as a kid, they were really cool fish to catch, because they would those long runs and head shakes and everything else as a kid just light up, as you experienced with your kids.
Absolutely, yeah. My youngest pulls on them now, and he's ate up with them. So there's everything you want in a game fish, short of jumping, you can find in a redfish.
Yeah, if you pull hard enough, they'll jump.
That's true. Lock that drag down and give her a yank. She'll come out of the water.
So I think they were a pretty big thing for me when I was first getting into saltwater fly fishing. Growing up, my grandparents lived also in Southwest Florida, around like the Fort Myers area. Yeah. They had a kayak, and like right when I got my first, it was like a 9-weight Reddington. I would take the kayak out, and there were some turtle grass flats that I could paddle to, and at low tide I could walk around and find tailors. Mm-hmm. And it took me like over a year to catch one.
Yep.
And I mean, when we talk about tailing redfish in the grass here in the Lowcountry, we're not usually talking about low tide fish. We're talking about high tide fish usually. And there's probably some other, there's some other kind of key differences. But when you were kind of making the transition from targeting them down there to targeting them in this new environment, what were kind of like the main differences that you were running, or challenges that you were running into?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. You know, day one when I showed up in the marsh, I think the biggest thing was when you leave that boat ramp and look around for the first time, everything looks so darn fishy. You know, coming from Florida, where you'd be like, man, there's a mangrove point with current flow, or there's a bar, the edge of a channel with water, flowing around it. All these spots just immediately make sense to you in that environment. But coming here, you've got oysters everywhere. Yeah. You have tide hitting 100 points down a 10-yard stretch of shoreline. It's really hard kind of dialing in what factors, what areas, what zones are holding those fish. And then, to state the obvious, the tides are so different. On a day, gosh, right now we're sitting at almost a 7-foot tide. That's a lot of water to cycle through in 6 hours.
I didn't realize it was flooding right now. I was driving in here. I was like, damn.
Yeah. We actually don't really have any low tides right now. We got so much water.
All this wind pushing in, but just those tide differentials. In Florida, you grow up, where I grew up, and you'd think, that water rises so slowly. I can sit in a zone for 3-4 hours before the water changes too much, where that's kind of shut down. Here, I mean, 5, 10 minutes and your zone's gone, the fish have moved.
Yeah.
So it's kind of I wouldn't say it doesn't make sense, but oftentimes your window is much more condensed on what you're doing.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't expect to be as much of a factor, like to your point, in like that those turtle grass flats, like it's a low tide. You know you see all the tails, and as the tide's coming up, it's like a more gradual, and then the water gets to a certain height. Like maybe your flat's got some gradient, and you kind of work up it as the tide comes up, and still see fish. But at a certain point, you're not going to be able to see tails anymore. And I didn't really expect that to be a factor here. But there are certain tides here, if you're flood tide fishing, where at a certain point in the tide, there is too much water on the flat
Absolutely.
to see tails. How, like, do you guys have numbers that you're kind of like looking for in terms of like an optimal window?
So I don't know, our numbers may be similar because we fish the same
Area
areas,
dependent too.
I like with, you know, if you're not calculating the wind or any other element into it, I think a 6'2" is like a minimum for me for a lot of the area that I fish. I like that seems to be about the time where the fish can still move and feel comfortable and stay hidden, but they can still tail. I like 6'2s to 6'4s if possible. Because it's like a double-edged sword. If you don't have enough, as we found out last week when we tried to go, like, you know, you're just scraping the whole way to try to get onto a flat, you never get it. Or if you have too much water, you never see a tail.
Right.
What do you like?
It's a great question. You kind of, to your point, very different flats on different water heights. So I've got some flats that'll start flooding, say on like a 5'7", 5'8", where they'll push up on. Then you've got kind of your normal flood, 6 to 6'5", then you've got high water flats. And they all kind of, just like your talk of gradients in Florida, they each kind of sit at different heights, so different water levels. The big thing is, you know, you want to be in about a foot of water. So if suddenly you've got a big tide and you're flat and you're sitting on 2 feet of water, it's going to be darn hard to see those fish. So it's time to find another flat. But I would say generally for the areas we're fishing, very similar to Connor, I'd say 6 foot is kind of the minimum I'm going to look for a true dedicated flood tide trip.
Yeah. So if you can find an area and kind of learn those different, you know, which locations might fish more effectively at different times, you can kind of plan your day out that way and like say when the tide is peaking, I want to be here. And when it starts to drop, like we should move to this place. And,
Absolutely right, Thomas. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then if you think of your tides as a big bell curve, so if you think of a big bell curve and then a line at 6 feet, the longer that bell curve is above that 6 foot, you can be up on the flood tide flat. So sometimes with those bigger tides, you'll get more time all the way up than just a short little hop over it, like on a 6 foot.
And then the whole marsh system here is also kind of like really kind of centralized around these rivers, right? And there's the whole factor of going upriver where the tide, as the tide's pushing in, it's going to be a different tide upriver coming out. Like same thing, you can kind of transition inland and out towards the ocean with that change in tide to kind of like plan your day out. I think that's something that maybe some people who are just getting into doing this themselves, like they feel like, oh, I have to go fish this one flat. Like I've fished it before, I've found fish there. And then once that's over, like they kind of pack it in and go back to the ramp. But
I like to look at redfish as they have staging areas throughout their day where they're going to be sitting. I group in my mind and kind of help me wrap around and try to figure out these weird animals. Are you have kind of like the busy bee traveler redfish that work in and out of creek systems. And then you have I call them the resident fish that they tend to hold into a creek system. And fishing a flood tide can help you figure that out because if say, you know, and just because we fish a 6'2" in Folly and Kiowa, that sort of area, that doesn't mean the guys in like Isle of Palm and Sullivan's, they're fishing totally different. So just for us, a 6'2" is what I like. But when you know it's going to fish, those fish, the way helps me think about it is like you kind of have those single travelers, but then you have like the larger groups that are going to be moving together. And when I say together, I'm not saying like large schools. I'm saying within close proximity of each other. So whenever the water first starts getting onto the flat, and you may not be able to put a boat on it at that point, but you'll start seeing those belly crawlers. And a lot of times when you find one belly crawler, you'll find multiple within a close area of that. if you're fishing a creek. And then from there, you can kind of work on going onto the flat. Whenever you're coming off the flat, it's very, very similar. And if you kind of sit back, if you're scouting, I think when it comes to red fishing, scouting is essential. I know Cleve and I, we scout together all the time, and there's a lot of times we don't ever pick up rods. We just look for fish, and it's like, okay, they're sitting there. But if you're sitting back and you're watching how the fish are moving off of the flats, a lot of times they're going to tell you what creeks they're using. And then you can go back on a normal tide cycle if you want to, and at some point you can kind of dial in those fish from there.
Yeah.
Now, some fish are going to work out of those systems. And I like to say within like 100 yards on the shoreline, they're typically hanging out on those creeks.
Mm-hmm.
And some stay in the creek. If you have deep holes in the creek systems, shelter, bait is a big one. One thing that people don't keep in account for here is we have a tremendous amount of bait. Like last week, it's like you couldn't pull a low tide flat and not have mullet jump in the boat.
Yeah.
It was really annoying. So we have a tremendous amount of bait. And so a lot of times that's something you can kind of overlook, depending on the season, is the bait, because it's everywhere. You can't get away from it. And then focus more on like those sheltered areas, maybe some current breaks, like ambush points, and you can kind of figure out how they're moving at that point. I like to think of redfish as kind of like dialing in deer. I know we have a lot of people that are coming to the area that have bass fishing experience and deer hunting experience. And if you kind of take your experience deer hunting and transition that over to the redfish, it can really help you out a lot.
Yeah. I know this will resonate with both of you guys, but like I've had buddies come into town that maybe they've never redfished before. They just don't do a whole lot of it. And like, I'll be pushing them around, and maybe it's a flood tide flat, and like they'll like every single thing that they see move, they're like, was that a redfish? Was that a redfish?
Eventually it will be.
Eventually it will be. Yeah, hopefully. But to your point, like there is a lot of bait and other life and kind of like distractions that over time I think you have to kind of learn how to kind of tone out. How do you kind of like talk people through that when I mean it's great to be observant as like a client on the bow of your boat and and point things out and ask questions, but like what are you saying to people when they might see a mullet or a menhaden or something, like creating some disturbance on a flat or in a creek, and how are you kind of like teaching them the nuance to look for when it is actually like something they should be casting to?
So a lot of it, I think, is subtle, that you will pick up over time. It's very hard to just on the first
go know immediately what's a mullet, what's a red, but some kind of things you look at. Mullet are naturally prey animals. So when they get bumps, they're usually going to bump earlier and further away than a redfish. And then when they get spooked, it's super erratic. They're going to zig and zag and turn all over the place.
Yeah.
On top of that, they tend to have a much more defined V-shaped wake as they push. Usually your redfish is going to be a very pronounced U-shaped wake, like the bow of a container ship. And then they tend to push in a straight line. They'll kind of hold close. It's like kicking up a quail. They're going to hold. They'll let it know when they're gone, but when they go, they'll kind of push in that straight line.
Yeah.
Usually kicking up a bunch of mud with them. And that's kind of a good way to know when you're looking for redfish ripples. Oftentimes, mullet, we're going to reference, is kind of that's the other fish on the flat that'll throw your eyes. When redfish tend to ripple, unless it's an obvious like, blue crab claws will get you on a flood.
Yeah.
You're lying if you say you haven't been caught by one of those
or
jokers.
the mud minnows that just jump straight up in the air.
Well, the mullet we have too will put like just the tip of their tail out of the water,
Right,
and
yeah.
I've been a victim of that several times. And then you have to like play it off like, oh, yeah, he saw it and spooked
There's
off.
actually a lot. Like I've been fooled by snakes, terrapin. I feel like I've been fooled by a bird or two.
The worst is when you get a
before.
new log on your sand flat. That'll throw you off real fast.
Yeah, or that snot grass when you can see that silhouette in the current.
Yep.
And I've had one day where I don't know how many times I had a client cast at snot grass, and it's like, I don't know what this fish is doing, but he's just really not into this fly.
Yeah, he's a vegan.
Yeah, he's a vegan fish, I guess. And then you have to like figure out after you realize it's grass, like, let's just move on. We'll just leave that fish where it's at.
Yeah.
He's spooked. He's not moving.
Yeah. I always think about it like what I usually tell people is like redfish are like the disturbances they make are either like way more subtle than you think they'll be, or it's them like blowing up on a bank. You know, it's like very clear, like that's a redfish. Although mullet, you know, they air out, and like if you catch the tail end of it, they'll fool you.
Mullet will eat a clouser too.
Yeah, they will. They will. One thing with the redfish here, especially the creek redfish, is that blue tail.
Yes.
That helps out a lot when you're trying, especially in the cooler months when the water starts clearing up a little bit.
Yeah.
That helps out so much, is being able to see that blue streak.
It also shows up in our little more dirtier water in the summer. It'll show up as white, that blue, when it filters through.
Yeah.
It'll kind of show. I always say mullet had that really fast beat. Reds kind of had that slow little puppy dog wag to them. And you'll see that white just puppy dog wagging. And that's really a good giveaway.
Yeah.
Yeah, because our mullet here, man, like they can be challenging. Like
There's some good 18-inch mullet in our waters.
I don't know if redfish are eating mullet or mullet are eating redfish, but we
True trophies.
yeah, we got some studs.
There's some hammers.
I was saying, you're going to pull one up on the wall. It's South Carolina mullet, baby.
Yeah, like triple scaled.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about seasonality, because there's definitely like distinct points throughout the year where things are changing.
Yep.
Absolutely.
How do you guys break it down for people?
So this time of the year is the hard part, because it's, you know, you have 1 week the water temp is at 68 and you're wearing long sleeves, and the next week you're in shorts and a t-shirt and the water temp's back at like 73.
Yeah.
So, you know, fall can be a great but very challenging time of the year, and on the other side of that, spring is the exact same way. So I know this year was a little weird because we had such a long series of flood tides. There were about 2.5 months we had a flood every single day. And I think the fish kind of got over it. And I think that helped them switch over to a winter pattern. Here, they school up in our winter patterns, and they tend to be a little more happier in that group of fish in the winter patterns. On the floods, you can still find fish on floods. I mean, we still find them. Cleve and I caught fish like January on floods, but your differences are going to be really, really lethargic when they're in their winter pattern. And you're not going to really catch a lot of tailing fish. It's going to be just kind of loafing fish that are on the flat that they want to warm up.
Yeah.
They're there just because it feels right.
Yeah.
And they'll still eat. It's just a totally different presentation. I don't know what your opinion is, but I think like an 18-inch redfish in the wintertime, pound for pound, could challenge a 30-inch redfish in the summertime for a fight.
There's no arguing dissolved oxygen helps them.
Yeah.
I think science has proven that dissolved oxygen is their friend.
Yeah, but like I think the bigger redfish, for me anyway, I feel like in the wintertime when they're in those winter patterns, they don't fight as hard as they would. You know, it's summertime, spring, fall. Have you encountered that?
Man, I've had plenty of fish year round, you know, those 30-inch. I've had some that'll just kind of bulldog you right under the bow, and I've had some that'll cook you into your backing. I think, you know, people always talk about tarpon having different personalities, and I think a lot of redfish do too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they all kind of fight different. Some will attack it and thump it. Some just kind of pick the fly up and eat it. You know, they're all kind of different. So it's kind of hard to paint with a broad brush, but I mean, there's no doubt once that water temp starts dropping with that dissolved oxygen, they pull a lot harder.
Yeah.
I would say if you were to ask me, like, throw a dart on the calendar for when the best fishing in Charleston is, I would probably tell you October through New Year's on redfish. Yeah. You know, they're certainly catchable all year. I kind of break the seasons up, to your original question, into 4. You know, you've got summer, fall, winter, and spring.
Yeah.
Your two kind of spring and fall are probably your best, to kind of what you were saying earlier, best seasons. You're challenged by fronts. So if you can get stable weather during either of those 2 seasons, man, it can be lights out.
Yeah.
Wintertime, your water's going to be clean. You're going to get the schools Connor was talking about. It's a lot of eyes, not just from the back of the boat on your cast. So you're going to want to make sure you do it right. Yeah. But it is a lot easier to get a fly eaten when it's presented past 100+ fish. Summertime is kind of the opposite, where there's fish everywhere, but not like a massive school in any one spot. So if you hate yourself a little bit and love banging a clouser down a shoreline endlessly, you will eventually catch something.
Yeah. And your species, you have a lot more species. Summertime
Yes, lot more to chase here in the summer.
And what about turbidity, the water clarity? Like that changes pretty drastically
Yes.
over the course of the year.
You know,
too.
summertime, it can be like fishing in coffee or chocolate milk. And then there are days in the winter where we are Florida Keys clear.
Yeah.
You get those days in the winters with the big schools, great sun, light wind, and man, it's enough to make you love every moment.
Yeah.
But someone getting into red fishing when it comes to that winter time, I could see that being a challenge because you're seeing the fish clear as day, but the fish can see you clear as day at that
Yes.
point. So, you know, summertime offers a little better something on your side with like that water clarity not being so good because you can it gives you a little more room for mistakes.
Yeah.
There's a lot more bait, a lot more other fish in the water making noise. The wintertime, you get these large schools, and yes, as Cleve said, if you present a fly in front of a fish a school of fish of 100 or more, the chances are something's gonna,
Right.
But you got to
something's
get
gonna
that
look at
fly
it.
there without them seeing it.
Exactly.
Right. Because
and-
one spooks and then
Our
yeah.
fishing here, you know, a lot of people think of redfish as kind of these big, dumb marsh carp. And you get those couple days a year where that's the darn truth and the stars have aligned. But you know, for the most part, at least our fish here, they can be incredibly technical.
Yeah.
They want it done right. They want it presented right. You know, they want it led well. You know, they're going to catch a false cast and they're going to catch rocking the boat. They're going to catch the little details and force you to make those little baby steps that add up to finishing the race.
Which I think, piggybacking on that, for a client that's never fished this area before, I think that exact thing is what poses the biggest challenge for a angler on the bow. Is a lot of people, they have fished South Florida, the Bahamas, wherever, where you have these large open flats, and they hear, oh, Charleston flats for tailing redfish. And yeah, we do have mud flats and grass flats, but they're not nearly like these super wide open spaces like a lot of people get used
it
to
might be
with
as
South
big
Florida.
as this garage.
There's plenty of places
creeks-
we fish we can barely wedge our boats into.
Yeah.
and you know, it's dropping a cast quickly, you know, and you may have something that you're trying to get a fly into, a little hole that's maybe the size of a hula hoop.
Yeah.
And that's where communicating with your guide beforehand on, you know, what to expect, what can I do to practice, because most of our casts are not long.
No.
It's more so getting that cast out quickly and accurately is the killer for success. But yeah, I mean, with the patterns, they all change for the angler as well, and the guy, whoever's pushing the boat and trying to keep it out of the sun and everything else.
Yeah.
And being able to cast and not rock the boat, and you know, doing short cast accurately with minimum false casting,
Yeah.
because you know, fish can see this.
Yeah.
Connor definitely hit on some great skills to have there. I've always found there's a couple things, like if you're a new angler showing up on a boat for the first time, there's a couple things you can do that require no practice, nothing like that, that'll drastically increase your odds of success. You know, the first one being line management. Where is your line? Is it sorted out? Is it in spaghetti piles on top of your feet? You know, lay it out on the deck, lay it out on the floor of the boat in the cockpit behind you. Make sure you know where your line is and it's good to go. The next one, excessive movement. Don't be jumping and shifting everywhere. You know, be locked in, get your bearing focused on 12 on the bow and hold still. You know, every time you rock that boat, it's just like sound waves emanating out over a flat. You know, and the final one, you know, I would say is right up what you said, just be ready. You know, you may only, you know, let's say it's your first time picking up a fly rod and you feel comfortable with, you can only throw like 15 feet. You know what? That shot at 15 feet is likely to show up. But if you're not ready on that split second when that fish is in that range, you'll miss it. So, you know, those three things take zero practice ahead of a
Never
trip.
fails. Once you decide to pull your phone out and send a text,
Oh, yeah.
that's when that fish is going to show
Oh, you get distracted. That's when you find out you're standing on your line Or, you know, that one time you reach down to grab something and rock the boat, you'll see like 4 fish blow up 30 feet away. You know, it's always, it's those little things, you know, it's not, saltwater fly fishing isn't this one great skill to master. It's so many little things that add to the puzzle. And there's so many little things that you can do to make yourself successful with no practice ahead of time. Just show up day one and already have the ball, like everything in your favor, just with a couple things.
Jasper, he works with us at Any Creek, and
Okay.
his older brother is a buddy of mine, and like we were fishing last winter, and he took his phone out, and I was pulling, and I saw a fish, and I was like, fish, and he's like, what? And he literally just shucked his phone over his shoulder into the water, never to be seen again.
I got a good one. We're off camera, right?
No,
Oh shoot.
We're on camera.
I got a funny picture to show you of someone that took a swim off my boat the other day chasing something they dropped.
No.
Yeah.
Someone I know.
We'll see.
Oh, maybe.
I can't drop names. We're on record here.
Okay.
I got to give them some protection, but it was pretty comical.
Fair enough.
It's not me. That's all I care about.
For once.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, for once.
I think we've all seen each other in some mud before. So,
Yes, we have, Thomas. Yes, we have.
So
Yep.
yeah. Cheers to that.
Yes.
Should we talk? Should we talk about gear?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, actually, so also not to be like completely fly centric. You guys you fish both fly and spin conventional clients as well. During those like spookier times of year, or even like when you're flood tide fishing on a flat, you're usually, I'm assuming you're throwing like a lot of light, small presentations, little jig heads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Kind of like similar in size and profile to a lot of the flies.
That burp was tough.
Sorry, bud.
God.
It hasn't-
Was that you or
no,
you?
it is
You're
not.
welcome.
It is not.
Jeez.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
It's like a fart through your mouth.
That's what I bring to the table.
Oh man.
Sorry, I got lightheaded for a second.
It's working.
Spin gear. What are you throwing?
So I
Huh?
Reset.
I like 2500 to 3000 series reels to medium light rods. I run 10-pound braid to 20-pound fluoro or mono for a leader, and I'll attach them with an FG. I love Ned heads. There's a lot of plastics that you can put on a Ned head where you can fish it fast, you can fish it slow. On a grass flat, I like fishing because most of the time fish are on those flats with their faces looking down, looking for crabs, worms, whatever. So I like having something that's going to be on the bottom with a presentation that's going to be kind of waving at you. Eye Strike Texas Eye makes a great head as well that allows that. I like pairing them with Z-Man a lot of times to float and wave in the current. I think we're both suckers for a TRD.
I was gonna say I can make this discussion super simple. I fish 2 baits when it comes to spin.
Okay.
In the winter months or when the water temp drops probably 60 or less ish, I'll go to a Ned rig, 1/10 ounce Ned head, green pumpkin TRD. Pair that on 10, 15-pound fluoro tippet and 6-pound braid on a 2000 size reel and a very light action rod. The other one I throw the rest of the year is a black and purple Z-Man Minnow Z 3-inch on a 3/16 ounce Ned head, 3/16 ounce Eye Strike jig head. I actually buy my rods around the plastics. I am so set in my ways. And to Connor's point, in the warmer months, I love that Minnow Z and explicitly Z-Man with that buoyancy. I can take that plastic, I can throw it out, I can slow and straight crank it, and I'm a minnow. I can hop it on the bottom, and I'm a shrimp skipping, or I can take it just like a Carolina rig. And since it stands up with that paddle tail in the air, I can just slowly drag it. It's like a Carolina rig, and that tail will flail around just like a defensive crab claw.
Right.
So I can be multiple types of forage, different scenarios with one lure. And then redfish eat a lot of oyster worms in general, like small prey in the winter. I don't know what they see in that damn TRD, but they love it. redfish, plenty of redfish well over the 30-inch mark fall for that little piece of plastic. So
The light action, are you thinking, is that like to help with casting or presentation or with feel? Like what?
I think with the smaller baits, it helps with feel, helps with distance and casting.
Yeah.
A lot of people get scared to fish light pound test braid, but as a very general rule, braid will always break a little stronger than it's rated for. So that 6 is still breaking around 8. That 10 is probably breaking around 12. And man, I tell you, tie 10-pound braid off to a tree, and just by bending on your rod, pulling on it like you're fighting a fish, try to break that. I bet you without pulling straight, like you're at best gonna heavily struggle to break it.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to step it down.
Yep. And I think that's with a lot of people that have bass fishing experience, because I feel like the bass world is so much broader. Like a lot of the clients I have, doesn't really matter where they come from. It's like everyone always has some kind of bass fishing experience, whether it was like growing up with their grandpa, their dad, whatever.
Absolutely.
But, that's where redfish are cool with spin gear, because redfish are essentially saltwater largemouth bass. You can use the exact same gear. You can use bait casters, spin gear, whatever. It doesn't matter.
I actually had a kid show up on my boat with his bait caster. It was like a 5.5 flipping stick he had.
Yeah.
And man, he got up on that bow with like a 3/16 ounce jig head and just put on a damn clinic as we pulled the marsh. Like his dad, he was probably like 13. His dad sat down on the console. We all just kind of watched him. I just pushed him up the creek. It was like every 4 feet, he just like flipped, like he was flipping beds for bass and waxing fish. It was just, it was incredible to watch. But it's to your point. It's just like flipping bass beds or anything like that, man. It's so similar.
A lot of people get kind of flustered because they'll go somewhere like one of these larger tackle stores and they see all the saltwater plastics and they have all these like the bass fishing experience, and it's like, oh, shit, what do I do?
Yeah.
You can catch them on a Senko.
Yeah.
You can catch them. You can catch them on rattle traps. Chatterbaits are good. I mean, if it works for a bass, it'll probably work for a redfish. Don't over. Hell yeah. I don't overthink it. Like, don't overthink it.
Yep.
Yeah, I bet I know a couple creeks that just have a ton of blowdowns and stuff. Like, imagine just picking that apart with a bait caster.
Oh yeah.
Like,
You can kill
probably
it.
have such
Smoke
a good
it.
day.
Yeah. The biggest thing is like what I see is if you have a bass fishing experience, you're trying to get into saltwater, the only thing I will say advice wise is there is no imaginary tree that you have to pull the fish out of once you hook them. So whenever you hook a redfish, you do not have to use your calves, your legs, your knees, your abs, your triceps, your
What about
biceps.
the non-imaginary oyster part?
That's
Those
fine,
oysters will
but-
pull back good.
Yeah, but a lot of my bass guys, when they do those like power deadlift hook sets, it rips that hook out of the fish's mouth. So that's the biggest thing, is like maybe dial that drag back a couple clicks, and just use like 2 or 3 groups of muscles in your arm and not like your whole body to set the hook.
Man, to your point though, if you're transitioning, like you're a diehard bass angler coming here, go with what you know. If you're a sit on the trolling motor power fisherman, man, go burn some good looking shorelines and power fish them. If you're a pick structure apart, go pitch docks, go pitch laydowns, rocks. Like, there's going to be fish in all those. Do something you're comfortable with, kind of get your feet wet. You don't have to reinvent the wheel all that much.
Typically, if it looks like something a largemouth bass would be in, you could probably find a redfish in it.
They're all predators.
Yep.
Calling Chris Hansen.
Yeah. Fly rods. So most of the time, are you guys putting people on 8 weights for the most part?
For redfish, yeah.
Redfish.
I've had clients from 6 to 8. 8's about for redfish, as big as I'll go. And then changing your species, it gets bigger from that. But yeah, I think 8 weight's kind of your do-all for all of it. But
Take a bass fishing.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but if you do if you have bass fishing experience and you want to throw a 6 weight or a 7 weight, I mean, we've caught plenty of fish on 6 and 7s as well.
Wintertime, I go to a 7 a lot for a lot more delicate with the bonefish line, kind of those more technical clean water fish. One thing I will say on fly rod selection is I have a lot of anglers that show up with these lightning fast action rods, and they've got them over line weighted to slow down. Our marsh and fishing here, a mid flex rod or a moderate action is actually great. if you're consistently taking shots over 40, 50 feet, those fish are either super wonky or the guy on the back of the boat's really screwing things up.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of our shots, a mid-flex rod's going to give you that feel, that delicacy to really drop it on that dime. You know, some of these rods feel like they're designed to punch into hurricane force winds at 100 feet on a bonefish flat that doesn't exist somewhere.
Yeah.
Real world, like not overpowered and fast action rods, huge.
Yep.
Can we break that down a little bit for people who might not be super familiar with like what action is
Yeah.
or like what flex is it or like so fast when you say fast action rod.
Yeah, so fast action is if my hand is the rod, you know, fast action is going to bend more at the top of the rod, where a mid flex is going to be more, you know, bend a little deeper into that rod. What that's going to translate to, you know, a fishing rod, whether it's fly or conventional, it's really just a spring to launch whatever weight there is. So a fast action rod, you know, the best kind of metaphor I've had is kind of golf related. It's like that sweet driver with a really tight sweet spot. And when you hit it wrong, your ball's on the next course. But when you hit it right, it sings. You know, a mid-flex rod's kind of got that good, accessible feel, delicacy. You can feel it load. It's kind of like that driver with a big sweet spot. It may not
Load
crush
is in
it.
flex.
Yes, load is in flex, correct. It may not crush it the 400 yards when you hit that sweet spot just right on the faster action rod, but it's going to feel good on most of your shots in close and easier to hit that sweet spot with feel.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good breakdown. In terms of so question, like we've talked about how you know, there's a lot of changes throughout a tide cycle, throughout the season, throughout a week.
Yeah.
Like things can change a lot, but like let's say you can only have one fly on the boat and it's got to do it all. Before I formally pose this
I know my
question
answer.
to you, before I formally pose it, I just want to say, like, also we talked a little bit about flood tide fishing and like doing this in Spartina grass. For people that don't know, it's like a pretty rigid grass. It's not something you can really effectively throw a fly into that doesn't have a weed guard
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
So like usually when we're talking about flood tide fishing, like if you have a box that's specifically for flood tide fishing, you probably want everything in that box to have a weed guard on it.
Absolutely.
There's different styles of weed guards, and maybe you guys, if you want to talk about that at all, you're welcome to. But my question to you is, if you can only take one fly, and it's got to be a flood tide fly, low tide fly, windy day,
Easy.
calm day. All right.
Easy.
What is it?
Clouser with the weed guard, baby.
Okay.
I mean,
Easy.
Clouser,
100%, yeah.
Clouser, it may not be the perfect fly in every situation, but it's never the wrong fly.
Yeah.
I bum out so many clients that tie and they ask like, hey, I want to prepare some flies for the trip. Like, what can I tie in advance? And they always expect me to have some crazy top secret crab pattern or something really cool to tie up. I was like, man, tie me a Clouser in the most boring colors you've got in deer hair.
Yep.
You know, and it's something will eat it.
Yeah. Our boxes look very similar
Yeah.
when it comes to like sliders or whatever else. We go one side. Clousers are 3/4 of the other side.
Yeah. It's like,
You have a miscellaneous.
yeah, quarter Clousers, quarter sliders, quarter like flood crabs, and then just quarter just random junk.
Yep. Yep.
Dead experiments that may or may not ever actually get tied on, but they're gonna be there just in case that time arises.
Yep.
Yeah. What about weight? Are you gonna put bead chain eyes on your Clouser, or are you gonna put dumbbells?
That's a good question. On a one fly scenario,
Yeah.
I'm going dumbbells. I can fish a heavy fly shallow, but I can't fish a light fly deep.
Fair enough.
Just lead them further.
I would go to a medium lead.
Chunky.
Yeah, I'd go to a medium lead. I like the medium lead, but I'd have a little bit of a beefier weed guard for around oyster beds.
Yeah.
Not because it does anything, but it just makes me feel better.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think I would do a light dumbbell.
Man, I'll tell you, those medium dumbbell Clousers on an intermediate line will dredge the snot out of some big redfish on like cold front days in the winter.
Reach down there and touch them.
Yeah, it's not sexy fishing, but when you got to pull a redfish out, everyone overlooks that play.
Yeah.
T14.
When you got to like make it happen, send her deep.
Yeah. Start counting.
Yep.
Give it 5.
Yeah, you're not going to win style points, but you will catch a fish.
What about the leaders? what are you guys typical? I know like redfish are not necessarily something where you have to get all too fancy with it, but 1 liter.
Yeah,
You get 1 liter.
done.
Can you add on to the leader, or is it just
Set in stone. Comes
1
out of the
liter.
box. However you tie it or buy it is how it gets fished.
Or cut it.
I think-
However you cut it.
I think I would run 60, 40, 20.
Ooh,
I like that heavier.
heavy.
60,
Yeah, I
40,
like
20.
What lengths?
3 feet or 2 feet?
3 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
3, 3, 3 on
6
each.
foot leader.
Okay.
60, 40, 20.
That's what I run usually. And then if a fish are finicky, I can add on like a 2 foot section of something a lot
But
lighter.
You're not allowed to.
I know. I'm just saying.
Okay. All right.
My standard leader that I tie up, I tie it in fluoro. I like that slight sink. Sure, it's a redfish. We like it to get under the water. 5 feet of 40 pounds, 3 feet of 25 pounds, and then 2 feet of 16 pounds.
Ooh.
I love 16.
Oh, God, yeah.
It just makes me feel that little bit better.
The 20?
Yeah.
20's a tarpon tippet. Come on.
That's
So
when you got.
16,
That's when you got to talk.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's
20
hard mono, though.
Yeah.
That 20 when those fish run underneath that down grass though, it's like
That's why you got that mid-flex rod. Protects my tippet.
That's why we have you on the back to chase them.
Yeah.
push harder, push harder.
Well, should we do impromptu skiff talk? Should we talk a little bit about this since it's behind us?
Yeah,
like
we can.
the boats.
They float.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
float. They do go in the water. But a lot of people who might be coming to this for the first time, they might pull up to the dock, see that. They're not going to know what that is
Yeah.
on the back there, or this on the front here. So
That's your baby, Connor. Take her away.
Well, I will say, for someone starting out, maybe a charter is not in the price range for everybody. So everything we've talked about today with the flood tide, low tide, this is all accessible by wade fishing as well.
yeah,
Or similarly, if you have access to a paddle craft.
Yeah, kayaks,
That's how I
paddle boards,
started
exactly, and that's the story with a lot of people in John boats. John
I
boats are
caught the snot out of some fish in Charleston when I was learning out of a 1436 John boat from the 70s with an old 2-stroke.
yep. So John boats are
They work great.
yep.
Don't worry about oysters.
They're do all. So like, don't look at a skiff and get the price tag on a skiff or the price tag of a charter. Don't let that discourage you from getting into learning how to dive into our fishery, because there's so
Absolutely.
many ways, very affordable ways, that anybody can get into them. God, I don't know how many fish we've caught on Orvis Encounters, and they're what, $150 for.
I've never seen a rod hold someone back from catching a fish.
Yeah.
It may make it easier, it may make it more enjoyable, but you're not going to not catch a fish because of the rod in your hands.
Fish have no idea how expensive it is, but talking about the boat, so
If fish only knew how much time, money, and effort we put into tricking them.
exactly.
with all that being said,
With all that being said, here's a skiff. So big platform in the back is where idiots like Cleve and myself are the gondola drivers, and
We push boat with stick and make mom proud.
yeah, we push the boat with a giant lightning rod that runs on these guys that run up and down the boat. Typically, if you have more than one person, the second person's either going to sit on the jump seat or dead center. When it comes to a skiff, they ride the best with someone on the bow and someone on the polling platform when it comes to a fishing scenario.
just balance wise.
Just balance wise, yep. They're going to draft the best with that weight evenly distributed.
Because that's got the most weight back there.
Yep.
And you may run into a scenario if you're pushing really skinny where you might ask, if you do have two clients, like, hey, can you also hop up on the bow just to
Yep.
pick that, basically lever the back up a little bit more. You can kind of
Absolutely.
push the depth limits a little bit more. that
And
way.
and even because your fuel tank on most skiffs
Fairly
Are
forward center.
going to be forward, yep. And so even the motor, the weight of the motor and whoever's pulling the boat, the fuel tank's not going to offset that weight. It'll help, but it needs that forward weight from someone staying on the bow. So if you have an additional person, just make sure they stay center line, sit on your jump seat, sit
The
dead
rules
center.
from before apply. Don't rock.
Yeah,
Don't rock the boat. Don't jump
rock.
around. Don't throw your phones.
Um,
Usually when someone sits on the hatch, it's time to dig through everything and find something.
Yep.
They find something to do. Just embrace the moment. Be there and enjoy it. Your set of eyes, even when you're not up on the bow, are just as valuable.
Yep. You'll see skiffs. Cleve and I are very similar. We run stools on the bows of our boat, more so where our
Platform somewhere, yeah.
I got a platform over here. But you know, we have clients, all age groups. You know, some people are really good on their feet. Some can stand for a long period of time. Some can't. So stool has helped out tremendously for that, especially when you start talking about going into open water that gets rougher. You have something you can kind of lean against instead of a little like 1.5-foot platform.
Fight big fish.
Yep. And other than that, the bows we like to keep totally clean and open. Anyone that has ever fly fished before knows that fly line loves to attach itself to things. So
On that note, one other thing, if you're invited as a guest, you're going on a charter, please bring all that you need to be comfortable for the day, but don't feel the need to overpack. Your 45 quart cooler, not gonna fit so great in a skiff. You know, bring what you need for the day, but don't overpack. You know, an inch of draft can be whether or not we get into a fish or not, whether we can push into a flat or off, how much harder it's gonna be on the back of the boat, and then just space. So that's another common error I see from newer anglers or, you know, people new to skiffs is just generally overpacking.
yep.
You know, bring what you need, be comfortable, but don't feel like you need to bring it all.
Yeah. Or like you like to say, the skiffs are just glorified canoes.
They really are. It is a glorified canoe.
And they're very, even though, you know, some of them are bigger, they're still very weight sensitive. And the less stuff you have on the deck, especially when you start trying to talk about landing a fish, it's the less stuff that line can attach to. You're going to trip over. It's going to roll at the wrong time and make noise. So keeping everything light and simple is, in my opinion, the best bet.
Yeah. I know we talked specifically about depth before when we were talking about flood tide fishing and water depth on the flats, but like low tide too, like it's a shallow water game.
In a perfect world, I don't want to be deeper than a foot, maybe 1.5 feet all day.
And those fish they will go shallower than this boat can go.
Oh yeah.
Even with zero, like
I've seen them
almost empty
eyeballs
tank.
out of the water,
Yeah.
you know, and that's what, 3-4 inches. I mean,
Yeah.
not every day they're strolling around with their eyes out, but catch them with their backs out as they transition between areas and stuff like that's not uncommon.
They've mastered knowing exactly how much water they need to survive, and they will just stay in that amount of water until the tide starts coming in, need be.
Yeah. What sorts of specific tips are you giving people to prepare for going out on their first red fishing trip if they've never done it before? I know casting's got to be just practice casting. Although we did talk about before, like these casts aren't necessarily very far.
Yeah, don't think you're gonna have to make hero shots all day. You know, get comfortable. You know, better can help if that situation does arise, but be comfortable delivering a 40-foot cast.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like that's pretty safe. That's pretty attainable for most people. You know, just, you know, and that'll catch you saltwater anywhere you go, even outside of Charleston.
Maybe practice in the wind.
Yeah, wind will help. Get a good double haul. A double haul will help your accuracy by driving that line speed, cut wind. Well, good double haul is just a good weapon to have in your arsenal, whether you're going to saltwater fish regularly or not. But more importantly, show up, be prepared, ask questions, learn. You know, I say to everyone that gets on my boat, if you're stuck on a boat with me all day and I can't teach you something, I've done you a huge disservice.
Yeah.
So ask questions, learn. Realize that if it's your first redfish trip, you may not go smoke every redfish you see, nail every cast, you know, be perfect. That's okay. Enjoy the learning curve. Because I think if we were all perfect, never made mistakes, the fish did exactly what we wanted to all the time, this would be a really boring sport if there was no learning curve. So
Yeah.
I would say everything he said. If you're you're looking for that golden sticker though, to really get out there and say, I did everything, being able to cast out quickly with minimum amount of false casting. Because sometimes your shots are just a couple seconds. Yeah. So
shot within a shot.
yeah, it's quick. So, just doing a lot of false casting with your lines not moving, you don't need to do it. So if you can practice getting out to that 40 feet with the minimum amount of false casting, yeah, that would be the advice that I would give someone. And for spin tackle, put a little like teacup or something at 25, 30 feet and work on pitching. I mean, very similar to largemouth bass fishing, except we run spin rods and not bait casters. And that's a big learning curve for some of my bass guys. Is they're great with bait casters, but once they pick up a spin rod, they're back at square one.
To your point with accuracy and then bait in the water earlier, our fish will eat, but their life is a bit like living in an Argentina dove shoot where they're just bombarded with targets. You've really got to drag it and get to that intercept. That fish is usually not going to run you down from 2-3 feet away.
Yeah.
You got to really slide it right over their nose. So that accuracy, spin, fly, or anything can really be the difference between having an okay day and a great day.
Yeah. Gosh, we could really. There's just
There's so much out there.
There's so much. I don't want to We'll probably have to do a round 2 or break it down in another video or something. I do want to also talk about just briefly talk about some other species too, because we did mention there's times of the year when dissolved oxygen is lower, typically when it's hotter out, and that doesn't mean you can't catch redfish or target them. It just sometimes means they don't. If you're practicing catch and release, they may not revive as well. And there is a higher mortality rate. And I know you guys are both, very aware of that. And because of that, you've found some alternative targets for people to look at. So what other things are you guys throwing at?
Well, we're both suckers for silverfish, but they're different. You want to talk about yours, and
let's talk with the one we both love, sharks off the beach, and then we'll go into our specifics.
Yep.
So we really love, if you're someone new to big game, fly fishing, or sight fishing with spin, man, slipping a couple miles off the beach, chumming up some big, sharks right behind the boat can be absolutely incredible and breathtaking. Watching an animal, 80, 100 plus pounds just sip a fly and rip you into your backing. Really nothing like that.
And it's fun too, because we've ran several trips this year where Cleve and I, we ended up doing, we call it the mega chum, and we both
wrapped up, chum the sharks in together, and we both boats alternate shots.
They're great because the worst, if someone's new at fly casting or new to saltwater, what would be a bad habit that would you would have to work on to critique with redfish, sharks love it. You want that fly to just slap the water
and then almost sit there.
Yeah, and they're great. They're a lot of fun. There's a big misconception with sharks though, that they'll eat just about anything, and they can be pretty picky. I hate when they kiss it.
I know, they'll come up so many times. Even when they eat, you expect it to be some big violent Jaws-esque thing, but a lot of time they come up and just sip it like a trout on a dry fly, and it's incredible. You've got just a split second to look down before you drive that hook set in and watch your backing disappear on the reel.
Yep. Yeah. I will say with the sharks, they're great for 10 and 12 weight.
I wouldn't go lighter than a 12.
I've done 10s. But
catching the little ones.
Yeah.
I've had plenty with a 12 we've had to break off because we can't turn them.
Yeah. So pick and choose with a 10. But yeah, they're great fish. And again, in the summertime when the water is really hot, we're both catch and release captains. So to give those redfish a break and just leave them alone, and give your client something different. A lot of people, they don't know how much fun a shark can be, especially on fly, until they hook up to one and you're trying to stop that train.
Oh yeah.
I mean, big entry level, big game fly fishing, or you're an experienced angler that wants something you can just pull on and just rips line off the reel, and it's super visual. I mean, it's so overlooked, but it's an absolutely incredible, accessible, and typically reliable target.
They jump, they do long runs, they dive, they head shake. I mean, they're cool fish. I love them.
What more do you want?
Yeah, I absolutely love them.
Talk about your personal favorite, the inshore shark.
I love a bonnet head.
You're a sucker for
you're the only one I know that obsesses over these things.
Yeah, I spent many a day last summer literally just sitting back and watching how they were acting, recording what the weather was doing, what the water was doing, and figuring out their patterns. And you can absolutely pattern them. I think for sight fishing capability, they're perfect. They're not really scared of boats. They're not shy of flies.
They tail constantly.
And they're the same thing as we talked about with the other sharks. They do long runs. They don't jump. That would be kind of cool, but they're the smallest species in the hammerhead family. So they have a really round head, and what they do with that head is they manipulate it like a planer. So when that fish, and they're great because when you hook them, instead of like a redfish where they want to run up a creek and try to hide in an oyster, bonnetheads want to run straight out to open water. Mm-hmm. So they're fantastic especially for a captain and for a client. It's just less amount of stuff to worry about breaking off on, but they're a blast. They're bullies. They bounce right back when you put them in the water. They don't go tell all their friends about it. They're a good time. So. Yeah. Cleve's is a little more challenging than mine.
I don't want to talk too much on it because I'll have people at me for letting the bag out of too much, but I spend almost my entire summer locked in on tarpon. Fish that needs no introduction. Yes, we have them in the Carolinas, and at least in most seasons, they're out there and definitely available for fly and spin sight fishing.
Cool.
Yep.
You want to just briefly talk about Cast+Drafts too, because this is an event. We mentioned it at the beginning, but if people are not familiar with it, it's a free to attend bi-monthly event, kind of y'all's brainchild.
Absolutely.
And it was kind of put together with the idea of being a place where people who are newer to fly fishing in the Lowcountry, a place where they can kind of come connect with people and learn. But I'll let you guys kind of talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. So I think it actually started with you and I BSing after a trip one day where it was
as most ideas do.
Yeah, this one time did not involve beer, so that was cool. But,
only in the name. Do I get credit for the name? I feel like. Do you remember I was like in Kansas and you texted me?
I don't remember any of that, but but we had talked about, we had both had a very similar, like, I think it was a week of just all the clients we had. It was like, man, if we had just an hour or 2 hours beforehand, we could these clients could have definitely gotten more fish, or like caught a fish that they were looking for or something like that. And so it was like, man, why don't we do anything like community wise where all the shops in the area, they do fly tying, which is great. They bring in local tires and stuff, but no one's doing anything with fly casting. And you can go buy flies, but you can't go buy casts. And so we decided to reach out. We reached out to another guy, Charlie Mogul. He's on the other side, the dark side of the harbor. We don't talk about that area. And then another guy, he was a guide out west, so he brings a really cool point of view on things, Langston Oxendine. And it was like, yeah, let's throw something together. And we got a venue put together. We only advertised on Instagram at first. I think the first one we had like 40-ish.
Yeah,
people.
Now turnouts very much, I mean, gosh, what do you think we're doing now? Triple digits on a night?
60 to 80 at least.
Yeah.
I think I've been to somewhere it's been over 100 people.
Yeah, I'd say so easily looking around.
It's been
biggest,
very welcoming. That's the biggest thing. Is there's no like
it's
clicks.
A good time.
Yeah,
it's great whether you're someone that's been in the sport a long time, wants to try different rods, different line pairings, talk to other anglers, or if you've never picked up a fly rod and want someone to kind of work through some basic stuff with you, how to start out, how to start, even ways to practice at home, or you're an intermediate angler that's, got the basic casting motion down, but just wants to smooth out a couple things, make connections with other anglers to fish,
That's been
interact with some of the other ones. The biggest, to echo what you said, or the biggest guiding light for everything with Cast+Drafts is being welcoming and accessible. We kind of how it formed is we've been to meetings for tournaments and other stuff where it's a big ego parade. We're like, how great would it be to get together, not have any of that in the picture?
Yeah.
So that's kind of leaving that at the door and just really kind of being a welcoming environment and helping others. it's kind of been the driving force in it. I think we've done an excellent job with that.
Yeah, half the people don't know that it's guides that put it on. Half the people think it's like the brewery. We do it at a free house most of the time. That it's free house that puts it on, because like even when it comes to taking credit for stuff, we don't really.
I say that's great that people think it's an organic thing in the community, because that's what we'd love more than anything else.
Yeah.
Or us at Any Creek, like we're very happy to be involved, but like let it be known, like it's guides who are putting this on for the community, and we're just happy to support it.
Mm-hmm.
And
y'all been great supporters.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, it's been really cool to see it grow, because I was at the first one.
Yes.
And to see, you know, how many new faces have come into the picture, and brands and food trucks and all of it. It's pretty cool. So
the food truck game has been all over the map.
Yeah,
been
the
good.
Food trucks have been the hardest part of the entire thing, but yeah, it's really, there's so many aspects we didn't think about when it came to it. It was like, you know, someone's looking to, you know, you're an Orvis guide. So say someone's looking to cast the new Helios. Well, Cleve's gonna have the Helios there. So it's like, okay, well, before I go spend hundreds of dollars on a rod to go try it, like, oh, I'm gonna go out here, I'm gonna talk to a guide that uses it all the time.
Yeah.
I'm gonna cast it, because we have multiple rods set up with different lines,
brands,
reels,
different line tapers from different companies to try. Bring your rod, try different lines on it. It's all about learning and ways it can be of value to you.
Yep.
You know, imagine if you went to a fishing expo, but instead of trying to learn about brands, we're trying to cater it to improving you instead.
Yep. Every event's a different theme. So we've done kayak, paddleboard fishing, skiffs,
tying.
fly tying. I mean, they've all been totally different themes. So yeah, it's been a really good time.
Yeah.
And the next one is, have you picked a specific date?
Not a specific date. It's the second week of December, I believe. We haven't locked in a date.
There'll be something pushed out soon.
Yeah, we thought we did, but I'm going to be out of town. And
you picked a theme or not? Not even.
So I think it's going to be, because it's going to be in December, and the sunset's going to be so early. And this will be our year anniversary. So,
yeah.
So it will be something fly tying related, where it can be inside. Because the first one, as you know, it got dark
a little
real early, and it got real cold real fast.
Yeah, hard to cast.
So we've talked about doing something where we invite several of the different fly tyers in the area to come in and do a fly tying night, or different guides come in and do their favorite patterns. So we're still brainstorming on it, but we know it's going to be fly tying related.
On that note, if anyone in the audience that's listening to this has an idea, whether something they want to address here, something they want to see at a Cast+Drafts, whether it's a theme or some way we can contribute back to, you know, what you're looking for in experience, let us know.
Yeah.
You know, it's all about, you know, helping you guys out there. So let us know what we can do.
Yep.
We'll put the Instagram page in the description below the YouTube video, and in the Spotify description as well as links if people want to book, get out and fish with you guys, learn more about Redfish.
Of course, and I will say, you know, probably speaking for Connor as well, even if we never end up on a boat together, if you have questions about inshore fly fishing, redfish, Charleston area, anything like that, and we can be a resource, reach out.
Yep.
You know, don't feel like it has to be business transactional. We're here to help y'all advance in angling.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do it again soon.
Muchas gracias.
Next time, maybe on the water. It was a little windy today.
Yeah, steady 20 to 30 is not the best.
Not that we're fair weather fishermen.
Surprised we didn't have a fly trip today.
And usually, once it hits 30, the calendar gets full.
Oh yeah, absolutely.